Hello, folks. Today, let's talk a bit about the retro scene. Both audio gear and computers have seen a strong resurgence, and things that have faded into the past coming back as a popular choice for consumers of all kinds. As collection increases, so do the prices, and we seem to be at an all-time high for resale value. This has inspired me to do a ramble on my thoughts on the subject. Since we're not going to dive too deep into any one area or device, I'd call this an essay with no real point or purpose. You have been warned. The most common examples would be vinyl records, cassette tapes, and so-called vintage computers. There are also more fringe examples such as mini disc, reel-to-reel, and digital formats such as DAT and DCC. As a person who lived through the eras that these technologies were considered the latest and greatest, I can say that each format that replaced the previous ones offered features and qualities that the previous generations could not. Computers obviously gained in storage, processing power, and graphics capabilities. Audio formats offered better longevity, greater frequency ranges, and many quality of life ideas. The era of the home computer seemed to really kick off in the late 70s and early 80s. The original idea was that home users could start to do things like keep track of their finances, have access to word processing and printing, as well as what came to be known as desktop publishing. Most of the common standards were measured in megas. Megabytes of memory and storage were the norm. Programmers had to be smart about their use of available resources, and the demo scene emerged to allow talented people to show off how much they could get out of their chosen platform in spite of its limitations. Some of the demos are truly amazing and seemed unbelievable at the time. Behind the scenes, they were using all sorts of tricks to try to squeeze out every possible ounce from the machines they were working on. As the software got more elaborate, the need for more horsepower and storage increased. As the computers offered more power, developers were able to add more things to keep competitive and interesting. This led to somewhat of a feedback loop where the requirements kept escalating at a surprising rate. By the mid-90s, the manufacturers also started viciously competing on price. There was a race to the bottom of both price and quality that seemed to culminate in the early 2000s that led to some companies, regardless of how good their machines truly were, to stop innovating and offering new features in order to remain competitive. There was also a drive to make the components cheaper and cheaper that led to results like the capacitor plague and hard drive click of death becoming all too common for the average person. The popularity of the home computer was a direct result of them becoming cheap enough for the everyday household to convince themselves they needed one. The internet also arose to give more of a use for the machines that were becoming as much a fixture of the home as a refrigerator. As production technology matured and the economies of scale continued to offer more for less, the computers became more stable and powerful while achieving somewhat of a price stability that lasted through the early parts of the 21st century. The trade-off is that the machines continued to become more similar and innovation was generally left to the software side of things. In the early era of the home computers, there was a diverse range of completely incompatible ecosystems existing happily in parallel with each other. Now we essentially have three main competing platforms, all determined by the operating system that they're using. As a caveat, the opposite trend seems to be happening in what could be called corporate class computers. Each mega company that's relying on technology seems to have created its own proprietary infrastructure. So, with the current generation of computers being orders of magnitude more powerful than those of even a decade ago, why would you want to use one from the past? I'm going to argue that it's mostly a sense of nostalgia and the fun of exploring. The maturity of emulators also offers a great way to explore these options even more deeply without the expense and hassles associated with some of the more exotic configurations. The thrill of the journey is its own reward. I personally fully support learning new things and taking yourself out of your comfort zone once in a while. Even if it doesn't yield a tangible benefit, it can help you gain a better perspective on what we use now and possibly add an appreciation for the things that have been created to make our lives now better. I also think it's interesting that the folks that use a lot of these computers day in and day out when they were relevant have the least desire to use them again just for the sake of enjoyment. I don't know of anybody who would trade their fancy new laptop for a typewriter. So that touches on the computer, one of the fastest evolving technologies that affects all of our lives in some way. Let's shift gears a bit and look at one of the technologies with the longest eras of continuous development and improvement: audio recording and playback. At the start of the 20th century, state-of-the-art communication was done almost entirely in real time, without much of any ability to store that communication or re-access it later. Several pioneers were working on ways to transmit communications to broader and more remote audiences. As we moved from the 20s to the 30s, the need and desire to record audio and video were still mostly unfulfilled dreams. Television and radio had both come online, but were enjoyed at the time of broadcast and then moved on from. The advent of the 78 RPM shellac record was one of the earliest mainstream entertainment formats. Just to give you an idea of what it was like, most records had a playing time between 2 to 5 minutes per side and required a new stylus every playing of a record. Most early units were strictly acoustic, meaning they didn't have any amplification or volume control. The old saying, "stick a sock in it," originated by the practice of literally putting a sock in a player's horn in order to drop the volume if it was too loud. During World War II, the magnetic recording format started to hit its stride. One of the original uses during the war was to make the country's leader appear in more places than was physically possible. The dawn of tape recorders had begun. Different companies went through all sorts of research and development, each hoping to garner the world's market for both the sales of pre-recorded entertainment and the early adopters of the ability to record your own. Several collaborations emerged and separated from various entities, each dreaming of financial dominance in the market. While records were still one of the primary forms of music sales, many magnetic tape options became popular and financially sustainable. The reel-to-reel player offered a high-quality option for folks in the mid-50s and lasted about 30 years in the average homes. While never a cheap option, the quality it offered had a broad appeal to anyone who could afford it. The compact cassette and several earlier iterations like it gave the working-class people who wanted it the ability to do the same in a more convenient format, if at the expense of a bit of quality. It also held its own for around 30 years from the 60s into the 90s. Bill Lear's 8-track format also got quite a bit of adoption in the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, the record player started to see its market share taken over by competitors. The popularity of the Walkman and its cousins also pushed compact cassette sales higher in the 80s, with the advent of portable players. The era of the Ghetto Blaster also boosted the format further into a lot of people's homes and streets. Behind the scenes, though, the race was on to dethrone the marvel of magnetic magnificence. The compact disc had come along, and the professional format DAT both gave the radio stations a more stable and higher quality product to use. The ability to almost instantly access any place on the recording made the average DJ's life a whole lot simpler. In the age of magnetic tape playback, stations would record long sections of music and then hop between those tapes and interject other tapes playing commercials. The whole system could now be completely automated and allow nearly limitless access of the entire library the station had at its disposal. This meant that the average listener would have no idea they were listening to a completely empty station in the dark hours of night when the audience was at its smallest. As the dawn of the digital dimension reached the audio world, the increased processing power of the average computer, coupled with the ever-growing bandwidth of the internet, offered a boon of media consumption. The VCR had given the home user the power to play what they wanted, when they wanted it, and on-demand media was the top of most people's had-to-have lists. Smartphones also continued to gain a role as the media player of choice for most people on the go. At home, the audio market continued to support a market for those who demanded better output than the average person wanted. But what had once been a booming ecosystem of devices and formats had shrunk immensely to a fraction of what it was when every home had a console entertainment system the size and weight of a luxury vehicle. Like the computer industry, this also caused people to accept limitations in innovation and quality in favor of convenience and price. While the variety of media and software on offer today is more diverse than ever, a good portion of the people using it are content to do it on a 6-inch screen with a pair of Bluetooth connected earbuds. So this leads me back to the original subject of this essay. What's the deal with retro vintage enthusiasm? For myself, it's simply the experience of something that I wouldn't have already had. I bought a reel-to-reel player simply to see if it sounded as good as the people who used them claimed. I bought a mini-disc player to see for myself if it really was a compression artifact-ridden nightmare as claimed by the audiophile crowd. In both cases, I'm happy to report that I was pleasantly surprised and have since created a pretty nice collection of both formats. I also own at least one computer from every vintage, from several DOS machines to Windows 11, Mac, and Linux. I think another allure of the collecting vintage hardware is that it seems to have had much more personality. Companies took more risks and devoted more loving care to their visions. Some succeeded, and some failed, but each competing format and design made no apologies for being different, either trying to solve an existing problem or convince the buying public they had a problem they didn't know about until the solution existed. These products weren't content with being exactly like all the others. As an example, when's the last time you saw a TV being offered with silver-brushed metal bezels? When console TVs were the norm, no two look alike. Now they all practically look identical. Maybe part of the reason we're drawn to own devices that are now functionally obsolete is that they can still give us some pride in ownership and give us joy from using them based on their unique or quirky design language. I'd like to hope that bold styling and risk-taking attitude can return someday to our home electronic devices. Some of us are happy to occasionally polish the wooden side panels or debate if we should get it in red or blue, just not avocado green. Some things were a bad idea, regardless of their popularity at the time. The conclusion is that no matter what the reason, if it gives you enjoyment to use, be proud of it and embrace its limitations. That's what gives retro tech its charm. Let me know in the comments what you think is driving the resurgence of retro tech and the fact that some of the prices are going for more than they ever did new. Thanks for listening and have an amazing day.